Kia ora, good evening, welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Nick Truebridge. Haere nei, reinforcements are on the way. A dead-in-the-water netball series is seemingly saved after a last-minute call for Jamaican netballers keen for a game. After an historic day in London, Queen Elizabeth is laid to rest alongside her late husband and parents. We'll have all the reaction from the UK. Meanwhile, the PM's just in time for a trip to New York with Trudeau. A lucky escape as the Taranaki family's desperate trip to visit a dying relative almost ends in more tragedy. And it's 2 for Timmers. South Cantabs rejoice you'll get 1 day off to celebrate a fallen monarch and a second to celebrate your glorious district. You can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora tātou, good afternoon, I'm Sarah Bradley. Workers who deliver hundreds of tonnes of jib to building sites across Auckland each day are striking for better pay. About 40 truck drivers and labourers are picketing outside the Penrose base of delivery company CV Compton. They want an 11% pay rise, but the company has offered much less. Truck driver Hori Potaka says the cost of living is driving them into hardship, while those further up the jib chain make big profits.
Jib's not an easy job. Everybody's wanting it at the moment, and it's worth gold. And I think we're worth gold, that's because we deliver it. They can't get the jib without us.
The strike will continue until the end of the week unless an agreement is reached. CV Compton have been approached for comment. An ex-Gloria Vale member told the court that as a child she could always be scared into doing something by the thought of being beaten. Trudy Christian sobbed while she gave evidence in the employment court in Christchurch today. Ms Christian says spankings from her parents and community leaders were common in the religious community during her childhood. She recalls being beaten with a wooden spoon until she confessed to something she hadn't done, and says even in preschool children were hit with a bat. Trudy Christian says it caused her significant psychological damage. The Prime Minister has arrived in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. After the opening of the UN's general debate, Jacinda Ardern will co-host a leaders' summit for the Christchurch call, along with France's president. The Prime Minister's diversion to London for Queen Elizabeth's funeral has cut her time in New York short. Public events to mark the death of the Queen in the UK have now ended, following the lowering of her coffin into the royal vault in a chapel in the grounds of Windsor Castle. However, members of the royal family are to observe a further 7 days of mourning. South Canterbury councils have voted to shift their regional public holiday, which clashes with the Queen's Memorial Day on Monday. This afternoon, the Timaru District Council unanimously voted to observe the anniversary on November the 11th, the same as the Canterbury Anniversary Day. Mayor Nigel Bowen says he acknowledges it will have an impact on businesses.
Congratulations everyone, another day off on the 11th of November. And I'm pretty confident, from a hospitality point of view, I certainly see the people out of Christchurch still moving around Canterbury. So I think those ones that would traditionally come to a Timaru, as an example, we're still quite likely to get those. So, I don't think it'll be as bad as we think.
The Mackenzie and Waimate District Councils have also voted to move the holiday. Microbiologist Susie Wiles says a COVID-detecting mask developed by Chinese researchers is incredibly exciting. Scientists at Tongji University in Shanghai say they have invented a face mask capable of detecting even tiny amounts of COVID or influenza in the air. Dr. Wiles says the technology could also be used for testing people who are unable to use nasal swabs. Works at a development site at Wellington's Miramar Peninsula have been put on hold after little blue penguins re-entered the fenced-off area to nest. Over the weekend, a korora was seen on Shelley Bay Road after fencing had been put in place to stop them entering the site. It's suspected members of the public raised some fencing and the korora got back in. Taranaki whānui worksite Kaitiaki, Charlie Rudd, says people have the right hearts but need to use their heads when it comes to tampering with fences.
We're assuming that there's more korora, so we need to completely clear the site, understand where they are, and then we've got to accommodate them. This is not about any development, this is about the korora now.
Full works on the site have been paused while solutions are worked on for the penguins. To sport, and the Silver Ferns Test Series against Jamaica will go ahead after the tourists managed to ring in 3 former internationals. 7 Jamaican players arrived in New Zealand yesterday for the series, which starts tomorrow night in Auckland. Bridget Tunnicliffe reports.
Visa issues stopped the other 5 team members arriving in New Zealand, putting the series in doubt. Netball New Zealand was prepared to lend Jamaica players, but that would have affected the test status of the series. Among the ring-ins is shooter Carla Borrego, who played at the 2003 World Cup. Netball Jamaica are finalising 2 other former internationals based in New Zealand and Australia. 10 players will need to be named in order for the games to be recognised as official tests. The series was originally due to be a 3-game tournament, but had to be reduced to 2 due to Jamaica's late arrival.
Martin Guptill will make a record 7th appearance at a T20 Cricket World Cup after being included in a largely predictable New Zealand squad for the tournament starting next month in Australia. Guptill will be the only New Zealander to have played at 7 T20 World Cups, while Shakib Al Hassan of Bangladesh and Rohit Sharma of India are set for their 8th events. The Breakers captain Tom Abercrombie will have eye surgery tonight, but is optimistic he'll be back on court in a couple of weeks. Abercrombie suffered a torn retina in a pre-season game against the Brisbane Bullets at the weekend. Meanwhile, Tall Black Taane Samuel has been suspended for a month after testing positive for the drug ecstasy. That's the news.
A final farewell to Queen Elizabeth.
We pray that God will give us grace to honour her memory by following her example.
But the historic events aren't over.
We've also got, he's got to get the crown shortly. I think as long as William has Kate on his arm and those lovely children of theirs, that people will still be turning to the New Zealand Women's Weekly to find out more about them.
And a refresh of royal collections.
Well, it doesn't start afresh, it's added to.
The Next Generation. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. Checkpoint is up next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo and Timaru Nui, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, also Gisborne. Occasional rain or showers, possibly heavy, clearing tomorrow evening, apart from the odd shower about Northland and Auckland. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Partly cloudy with isolated showers today, rain for a time early tomorrow, then showers. Some may be thundery. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough. Scattered showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms about Bulla this afternoon. Canterbury, partly cloudy, isolated showers clearing this evening, then showers spreading north again tomorrow. For Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain and possible thunderstorms in Westland clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered showers with thunderstorms possible today, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain developing this afternoon. You're listening to RNZ National. It's just gone 7 minutes past 5. I'll be back with the headlines at around 20 past.
Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Truebridge in for Lisa Owen. Well, an 11th hour SOS for Jamaican netball players may have salvaged a seemingly doomed first test against the Silver Ferns tomorrow. In an unprecedented saga for the sport, the Sunshine Girls only managed to get 7 players to New Zealand after visa issues meant 5 were unable to transit through the US. But coach Connie Francis told me they're trying to get 2 other players here from Australia, and they've managed to locate a Jamaican player living in New Zealand who last played for the Jamaicans at the World Cup 19 years ago.
She's here in New Zealand, and that's the beauty about it. She's a past player, playing 2003 World Cup for Jamaica, and her name is Carla Borrego. And she plays in the Suncorp, used to play in the Suncorp, but I don't know what she's doing, if she's still playing netball down here. But when I heard that she'd be rejoining us, I was very happy because she's a very good player and somebody that I'm accustomed to. Yeah.
So she's coming out of retirement, Connie?
I'm not saying, I wouldn't know. I would not say that if she has been retired. But I know that she has, after that last World Cup, she played. She was a very young kid, and she played in Suncorp. And then from there, I saw her in Miami playing twice. And so I don't know if she's playing for a team down there. I'm not sure.
What about the other 2, Connie? You mentioned you would have 10 in total. So where are the other 2 coming from?
Well, I'm sure that one is coming out of Australia. I'm not sure. I mean, I'll just have to wait on the whole logistic to be concrete before I can say anything else about them.
It's not ideal, though, is it? So can we go right back to the start here? How did we get to this stage? How have you ended up with a team that isn't your complete team in New Zealand on the eve of what should be a test match tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that personally for me, I'm not accustomed to. I've played 5 World Cup and I've never seen something like this has ever happened. But, things happen beyond our control. We were hoping to have most of the girls, at least 10 from games, but we had injury problems and that we have to take care of right now. And certainly we had a squad of 18 players, plus we feed from our under 23. And so they rejoined us, and we didn't know that it would have taken such a very long time for them to get the visas. And also we try to get the visas for the 5 that is not here, for the US visa, in order for them to travel with us. But that because of COVID, they have this whole backlog, and they say that they weren't able to facilitate us. So next, I know that Netball Jamaica and Netball New Zealand was trying to route them through, I think Germany or something like that, Germany, Singapore, something like that, And I was hoping that they would have been here. So when I heard that they couldn't make it, I was a bit, that was a bit setback. And also not just for us here, but, the players who have worked so hard to be here.
These 5 players, though, who do remain overseas, what specifically are the issues with their visas? Is it simply a case of they weren't processed in time, there was a backlog and there's therefore a delay? What specifically has happened here?
It is not only them. The fortunate thing for us is that the 7 players, including myself and our assistant coach, is that we have US visa. So we travel through Miami, New York, and then we came here. But we were trying to get the US visa for the girls also in Jamaica, but US just couldn't facilitate us at such a short period of time. And then we had to wait for a very long time in order to get the New Zealand visa.
So where does the fault lie here, Connie? I mean, is it effectively an organisational issue?
I would not, I cannot say where the fault lies. All I know right now is that something didn't go through that should have. It's beyond both New Zealand and Jamaica control, and we just have to accept that and just move forward.
But you're confident the game tomorrow will go ahead?
Yeah, the games will go ahead, and I know that both New Zealand and Jamaica will certainly benefit from the series.
And they'll go ahead as test matches?
It should go ahead as test matches as long as we have 10 players.
Has this ever happened to the Jamaican team before, or any netball team you've been associated with that's been an international play?
No, this has never happened, and I can tell you that it's new. And it's just a learning process for both New Zealand and Jamaica, and we have certainly learned from this thing.
What reaction have you had from New Zealand netball, Connie? Obviously, this is costing them, well, they say it could be a financial cost. It's certainly costing them a lot of time. What have they said to you and vice versa?
Well, Netball New Zealand has been very good. I can tell you the logistic about the costing, they wouldn't reach out to me with that. I mean, Netball Jamaica and Netball New Zealand will certainly deal with that. But I can tell you that the warmth that we have been feeling here is just overwhelmed, and we are very happy that, yes, that we can benefit from playing some game here.
What's your message to fans here in New Zealand who, well, would have been keen to go to these games and are now looking at the size of the Jamaican squad and are maybe on the fence? What would you say to them?
It's just a very unfortunate situation beyond our control, because certainly that we have left 5 young players back home who would have certainly made an impact for themselves, especially gaining a valuable playing time against a number 2 team in the world, but it didn't happen. We are sorry that, things just went bad, and it's beyond our control. We would have loved for it to be another way, but it didn't, and we just all have to get past this.
And you've still got some strong players here, right? I mean, as we said earlier, This is part of a squad that finished second at a World Cup. So I guess the question is, do you think you can win?
I wouldn't say if I think we can win. I would just say that we'll give a good account of ourselves.
It's 5:14. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that story. Were you thinking of going to the game tomorrow, New Zealand versus Jamaica? And will you still go? And actually, while we're at it, what about some other New Zealand sporting events that have descended into, well, a near farce, as this had the possibility of doing? You can text us about that on 2101, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Queen has been laid to rest after 10 days of mourning, which has seen a massive outpouring of emotion all around the UK. It culminated in what the British do best, an extraordinary display of pomp and ceremony which saw thousands of armed forces guide the Queen's coffin from Westminster to her final resting place at Windsor Castle. An estimated 2 million people were on the streets of London for the big occasion. Tens of thousands of people packed into Hyde Park near Buckingham Palace to see the broadcast of Queen Elizabeth's funeral. RNZ's Corin Dan and our cameraman Nick Munro were there.
With multiple giant screens dotted around the park, hundreds of thousands of people chose to watch the funeral together as a shared experience.
It was more of a celebration of her life almost, so I felt that the crowd were just very dignified, but they almost, they were paying tribute to her, but it wasn't as similar to Diana because, she was really young when she died and it was more tragic, but it just felt like more of a celebration. Everyone wanted to pay tribute to be here together.
Some brought along some special friends.
It's lovely seeing the kids' faces when they suddenly see him, actually. Paddington, so that's lovely.
And it was not just locals. Many tourists also took the opportunity to view the funeral there too.
We wanted to be where the crowds were. We didn't want to stay in our hotel, but we just wanted to be part of the community.
And definitely this moment in history, because I think it is a moment in history.
Many in the crowd were moved to tears by the service and procession, all standing for God Save the King and the 2-minute silence.
Couldn't be no better. It was just amazing. And obviously I have to pay my respects for everything that she's done because my late father served Her Majesty the Queen. That was her boss. So Coldstream Guards, 1st Battalion, so she's done everyone so proud. I mean, they'll never make another one like Her Majesty the Queen, that's for sure.
I just think it was just the most incredible spectacle. I've never seen anything like it. I've always missed the Jubilees, so I thought I'd make the effort to come up, and it was well worth it.
When everyone went quiet, and you think how many people are here, that was just something else, really. And I'm glad I was part of history to witness that.
For many, today was the culmination of a week of mourning and queuing.
A little bit tired. We did the paying the respects last night, so we went straight from one to the other. It's just an amazing thing. The whole town's turned out for it. We've come from Birmingham, so we've come quite a way to see.
All happy to be there and soak up more special history-making moments.
And my mother, my queen, long life for her. I hope she will come back again to meet us. And she did a good job, 70 years of her life. She never sat one day. She was serving the people, serving the country.
I saw the coffin. We walked in the queue for 12 hours, and to be inside, we forgot everything. We forgot the long queue. We make it, but the way we are inside, we feel like we fly. It's a good memory, still forever.
I feel quite honoured to be here.
No, it is a privilege. I feel privileged myself.
Yeah, so I say I love New Zealand, I love England. They're the two most important countries to me, so I had to be here. It will never happen again in my lifetime.
And Corin Dan joins us now from London. Afternoon, Corin. Morning where you are, of course, and the morning after the day before. So what happens now? Does London return to normal? Is there more to come? Fill us in.
Yeah, pretty much has returned. Hi, Nick. It pretty much has returned to normal. Actually, amazing how quickly they were pulling the bollards down and the barriers within minutes and hours. And last night I was up at the Abbey and it was almost back to normal. They moved very fast to get things flowing. So it really does feel like a pretty normal workday morning here early in London. The official morning period ends 8 a.m. this morning London time, so it's an hour or two away. At that point the flags can go back up the masts. I think the royal family do continue to mourn for another week. There's a slightly longer. So there's still a few issues there, but in terms of wearing the black ties on the broadcasting on the BBC and the programming, which those sort of things, they'll go back to normal. And then I guess you've got to wonder whether it will be a resumption of politics, debates about some of the big issues here. Cost of living is a big one, energy is a big one, the war in Ukraine, all that stuff will come flooding back into the national debate. Not least perhaps too some discussion about that transition to the monarchy in places like New Zealand.
And you've been there for 10 days or so, right? And I think you mentioned in your story just then that it was a privilege or an honour or words to that effect to be there. So what has struck you most about being there in London? Can you paint a bit of a picture for us, on the other side of the world?
Yeah, what struck me, a couple of things that struck me, is firstly when you see the pomp and the pageantry as we've seen, we see the power of the monarchy through its actions, through its rituals, and that reinforces its credibility, if you like, and that makes you kind of get your head around the idea of a transition, because the monarchy is there by consent. They're not an absolute monarchy. So you start to sort of see how it all works, and of course that was the first experience for our generation really of that transition, and you can see why they take it so seriously to get everything right, to reinforce those traditions and the stability and the continuity. And that comes through so powerfully and beautifully. I mean, it was undeniably beautiful lying on the grass at Hyde Park, listening to that service. A lot of it going over my head in terms of the nuances of the prayers and the lessons and these sort of things. But it just sounded absolutely beautiful. The other thing that really has struck me and my cameraman Nick here would be the people that we have talked to right throughout the week, those in the queue, everywhere. The commitment and the love for the Queen, how quickly they are to bring up their own personal experiences of a recent death or some personal experience they have with a family member who has served in the army, perhaps served. They all feel so proud, and at times you think some of their enthusiasm is a bit nutty, but actually it's not. They just genuinely love it. They felt part of something so big, and that is the privilege for me to be here, to get to feel part of, and I think people around the world do, but to be here in London, feel part of that history-making event. That's what's the privilege.
Yeah, big 10 days, Corin. Hopefully at some stage you'll have a chance to sit down in one of the London pubs there and have a bit of a beer and a debrief. Great work by you guys over there. Thanks, Corin. Of course, Corin's been over there. Nick Monroe, he mentioned. Katie Todd as well, and Jake McKee as well. Great job over there. It is 21 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora e te iwi, homai o whakaro. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Did you stay up last night? Did you watch the ceremony? Give us your feedback. But first, here's Sarah with the headlines.
Kia ora, Nick. The Silver Ferns Test series against Jamaica will go ahead after the tourists managed to ring in 3 former internationals. 7 Jamaica players arrived in New Zealand yesterday for the series, which starts tomorrow night in Auckland. Jamaica's coach, Connie Francis, told Checkpoint that it's an unfortunate situation and the team apologises. Workers who deliver hundreds of tonnes of jib to building sites across Auckland each day are striking for better pay. About 40 truck drivers and labourers are picketing outside the Penrose base of delivery company CV Compton. The workers want an 11% pay rise. The Prime Minister has arrived in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. After the opening of the UN's general debate, Jacinda Ardern will co-host a leaders' summit for the Christchurch call, along with France's president. A former Gloria Vale member says she was told to make sure the men had enough food, even if the women didn't. In Christchurch today, Trudy Christian told the Employment Court women were told off if they ate while they worked in the religious community. She says women and girls also sometimes miss dinner if there wasn't enough food for both men and women. Works at a development site at Wellington's Miramar Peninsula have been put on hold after little blue penguins re-entered the fenced-off area to nest. Over the weekend, korora was seen stuck on Shelley Bay Road after fencing had been put in place to stop them entering the site. To traffic now, and in Wellington, the crash on State Highway 2 at Horokiwi is now cleared, but there are southbound delays past the Normandale Road overbridge, so do take care there. I'll have updated headlines and traffic at around 20 to 6.
Thanks, Sarah. Black Caps opener Martin Guptill is the most experienced player named in the squad for next month's T20 World Cup in Australia, but he's under pressure to keep his starting spot. Guptill will make a record seventh appearance at a T20 World Cup after being included in a largely predictable New Zealand squad for the tournament. The 35-year-old is aware newcomer Finn Allen will challenge him for a place at the top of the order.
There's always competition for spots, isn't there? And it's always good fun competing. So, look, we just got to go out there and, the games we play against Bangladesh and Pakistan down in Christchurch, we go out there and do the best we can.
The Black Caps will play a tri-series in Christchurch in the lead-up to the World Cup. Sports reporter Felicity Reid joins us in studio now. Evening. Well, let's go through the squad first. Let's go. Many changes.
Well, these T20 tournaments are coming around thick and fast, 10 months since that last one. So this squad that has been named today is a reasonably steady squad. As Gary Stead himself said, it's settled. There are only 3 changes to it. So it's Finn Allen, as we mentioned there. He's just last week picked up his first central contract. He comes in, as does Michael Bracewell. The other change from that tournament, which was last year in the UAE, for you remember New Zealand, Australia in that final there. But the other change there is Lockie Ferguson. He comes in. He was named for that last tournament, picked up an injury, was unable to play. So he comes in to replace Kyle Jamieson.
So who are the big guns at this World Cup? Who have we got to get through? Who are the favourites? Because, looking at our squad, it's would it be up there, or will we battle a little bit?
Well, the person who was doing this draw certainly knew what they were doing. They put the blockbuster, the replay of that final, to start the Super 12 stage. So that is New Zealand, Australia in that first game. Then we have Afghanistan and England, who we have to get past, and 2 qualifiers who come through from that first stage of the tournament. Speaking today, Gary Stead expected one of those to be Sri Lanka, and I just had another look, and I think it might be West Indies or Ireland who we could face as well.
Guptill's still there, right? 7th T20 World Cup. Does this speak, do you think, just using your sporting nous, to perhaps an issue around depth in New Zealand cricket, or is his place warranted?
So the depth that we've seen here, like with Van Allen coming in, these people generally will be, giving him a run for his money. So Devon Conway as well will be another one. He's come in with the wicket-keeping gloves and has the potential that he will be opening the batting and behind the stumps. So there is, I think, genuine competition for some of those spots. We're not sure how many. Well, that wasn't long since that last T20 tournament. Maybe the next one, maybe Martin Guptill won't be there.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with the latest from the Black Caps as they head towards that T20 World Cup campaign. Right, the Prime Minister has hitched a ride on Canada's plane to fly from London to New York to take part in the United Nations Annual Leaders Summit. It's Jacinda Ardern's second trip to the United States this year, but her agenda has been swiftly reworked in the wake of the Queen's death. Our deputy political reporter, Craig McCulloch, is in New York.
From the big smoke to the big apple, the Prime Minister has touched down in New York, fresh from the royal funeral in London. Jacinda Ardern joins a deluge of world leaders who, having paid their respects, are now gearing up for some high-stakes diplomacy.
I'm doing everything I can to travel as quickly as I can to make up a bit of lost time.
That includes hitching a ride with her Canadian counterpart, Justin Trudeau, who offered her a seat on his plane, meaning both will arrive in time for the opening of the UN's general debate. Ms Ardern's agenda has already been cut short by 2 days, prompting a program rejig. Some events have been rescheduled, others going ahead without her. The Tourism Minister, Stuart Nash, stepping in.
We want to be the best in the world, but we also want to be the best for the world.
Many believe that investing in good means you won't do well. But in New Zealand, doing good and doing well is what we've always done.
New Zealand Trade and Enterprise this morning launched its new marketing campaign in New York, promoting the country as a hotspot for investment. That was to be a key focus of Ms Ardern's visit, but logistics and new sensitivities mean it will now take on a lower profile. Indeed, her absence meant international media cancelled plans to attend today's function. NZTE's General Manager for Investment, Dylan Lawrence, philosophical.
Oh, she is an absolute rock star. She's creates a huge following here, and she's got a great brand that's just amazing for New Zealand for us to leverage off. But we also understand the situation.
Ms Ardern's focus will now turn to diplomacy, the event a prime opportunity for leaders to have one-on-one meetings while all under the same roof. The PM's schedule is lighter than previous years, though she did just sit down with the UK's new Prime Minister Liz Truss while in London and can now tick off a mid-year meeting with Justin Trudeau. Professor Al Gillespie from Waikato University says while Ms Ardern is still popular abroad, she's no longer the major attraction she was the last time she attended.
The world's moved on since 2019. We've gone through a pandemic. We've got the war in the Ukraine. We've got tensions with China. And so, although she is still a global superstar, there's new people who are arriving.
Indeed, there is a great deal for leaders to discuss as the world grapples with conflict, COVID-19 and climate change, economic instability and food shortages. International relations expert Robert Patman says the PM will certainly use her platform to lobby for more collectivism.
The world's confronted with problems which do not respect borders and cannot be solved by great powers acting alone or even together. I think the Prime Minister will be hoping to build support for a strengthening, not just preserving the rules-based order in the face of challenge, but strengthening it.
An example of the international cooperation Ms Ardern is advocating is the Christchurch Call, a commitment to curb online extremism. The PM will co-host a leaders' summit tomorrow with the French President Emmanuel Macron.
It's 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Nona Peltier is in now to talk business. Evening, Nona. Kathmandu is the name people will mostly know this company by, but it's officially KMD Brands. They've seen a profit drop. Why?
Well, mostly because of COVID. So they were...
Surprise,
big surprise,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
First half of their financial year was pretty rough with COVID lockdowns and so on. Second half, there was a rebound, but they had some serious issues with one of their brands, which is Oboz. They manufacture shoes, and that factory was closed, I think they said, for 3 months as a result of COVID. And that was their factories in Vietnam. That really hurt their business. They were unable to fulfill, I think, 40% of the Oboz orders they received. So, yeah.
Is that right? 40% of orders?
Yeah, 40% of Oboz orders for the year were not fulfilled.
Wow,
That's
okay.
a serious reason why. However, they say things have improved. There's a bit of a rebound in the second half. They're optimistic about their outlook. And their share price finished up 3% today.
And talking about improvements, our first home buyers quietly returning to the market. What are the numbers showing? Yeah.
Okay, so in December, which year? December last year, there was about 25% of the share of the market was first-time buyers. And then we had a number of measures to cool the market. And then that dropped back to about 21% by March. But guess what? We're back up around that 25% mark. So yes, they're taking advantage of the opportunities. There's been a number of investors and so on have stepped out of the market. There's still cash buyers around and so forth. But yeah, there's definitely an opportunity now for first-time buyers to get into the market. They have time to shop around. They're not under as much pressure. And of course, there's an easing in prices as well.
The markets, please.
The markets, yeah. Well, we rose 1/3% today. And I really mean 1/3%, 0.333%.
Okay.
That's a 38-point gain to 11,570. The news on the dollar, more weakness we're seeing here, 59.3 US cents. That's ahead of the US Federal Reserve coming out later this week with what is expected to be a pretty hefty interest rate hike, 88.3 Australian and 51.9 British pounds.
Thanks, Nona Peltier there with our business news. We'll have more business. Well, throughout the evening, I hope. Let's hope so. Anyway, a Taranaki family making a last-minute dash to see a dying relative are lucky to be alive after their car was caught in a massive slip near Urunui on State Highway 1. Rex Wade was driving family members back to New Plymouth so they could see Nan one last time when the slip appeared out of nowhere. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter, Robin Martin, has more.
Rex Wade says he was only driving about 60 to 70 kilometres an hour with the windscreen wipers on full when the slip was suddenly upon him.
It was pretty out the gate. We're just cruising back from Auckland, coming by friggin' Uanui, and it was like torrential rain. Come to a little bit of a slight bend, and then all of a sudden the road ended. There was a big slip, and we went driving into it and just sunk in and was pretty out of it. It was a pretty big slip.
Rex's car sunk into the top of the tyre rims. He reckons it's fortunate they hadn't been travelling any faster.
We were just lucky that it was only dirt and water where we were instead of big trees. We're going at 100 k's or something, we probably would have got seriously injured or even dead.
While Mr Wade's car suffered superficial damage, a vehicle ahead of him took a direct hit. But miraculously, no one was injured.
They got out, they were all good. No one was injured, just their car was wrecked. We just all got out and ran up the road to wave down any other cars in case they hit mine.
But unable to drive away from the slip, the family never got home in time to see Nan before she died.
We just got to Uanui and that happened, and unfortunately we didn't make it back here. She had already passed away. Her son was hoping to see her before she died, and not even, we didn't make it.
Shakira Wade was asleep on the back seat and woke up when the car hit the slip.
Because we crashed, and I looked at my sister-in-law, and she said we just crashed. And then we got told to get out the car because it was a little bit smoky.
She was feeling the pain of not having spoken to her Nan one last time.
There was 4 of us. We're coming back from Auckland to come back to see that, find out Nan died.
Waka Kotahi reopened one lane of the highway at 4 o'clock this morning and warned motorists to expect delays while it was being cleared.
South Canterburyans have spoken. They will get a day off to mark the Queen and Anniversary Day. The government left it up to local leaders to decide what to do about the clash after announcing a one-off public holiday next Monday. Waimate, Mackenzie and Timaru locals got to have their say. More than 80% who took part in the survey were for a temporary date change, and the councils agreed. Timaru Mayor Nigel Bowen joins me now. Evening, Mr Mayor.
Good evening.
What's the response been in your neck of the woods? I suppose 80% speaks for itself, but when you've been out wandering the streets of Timaru, what have people said to you?
Oh, look, yeah, generally, very supportive. And I think, generally there's good understanding that it's a one-off. I think they feel like they're getting put back on a level playing field by having this holiday, with the rest of the country. And, we'll combine it with Canterbury Anniversary Day. So, it works out pretty well.
Obviously 20% opposed, right? And we always know that there is going to be a bit of business opposition to this. So what have they said to you?
Yeah, definitely. So it was 86% for, so there's probably 13-14% opposed. But, definitely. Look, and I'm a business owner myself and really wary of the costs. We know all the pressures that have been on businesses this year. But I think, generally there's understanding that it's a one-off. It's on the back of Memorial Day, and it just so happened to coincide with our anniversary. It could have coincided with anyone else's. It just fell on us. So, look, we recognise the issues that businesses are facing, and we're not. I'm not a part of that. I'm a part of that myself, and recognise the hardships. But also, the workforce is working really hard, so I think they deserve that extra day off.
Obviously, you've run the survey, and then you've obviously taken council time to have a vote and all those sorts of things. Do you think the government could have done more to avoid councils having to carry the burden here?
Yeah, look, I think so. Look, initially we, felt like we got the hospital pass, and then, you work through it, and it's just another decision you have to make. Could there have been another day? Could it have been a Sunday or a Thursday when it wasn't going to align? Yeah, they could have. But look, hey, it is what it is, and we've worked through it.
And so will it be a permanent move, or will Anniversary Day move back next time around?
Yeah, it'll move back. There was some, discussion amongst some people out there that were keen to have it align with Canterbury Anniversary. In South Canterbury, we have a lot of people take the day off to, to go to show day and those sorts of things. So, there is that conversation happening out there, but, that's a decision for another day. I think, there's the strong green and blacks that really appreciate, having their own day too, and probably don't want to be taken in by the regional holiday.
A quick fire. What will you be doing? Is it too cold to, I imagine it's probably too cold to whip on the Speedos or the swimming trunks and waddle on down to Caroline Bay and have a dip?
Yeah, normally a little bit cold. We've had a bit of an Indian summer the last sort of week, and it's been pretty good. But no, I'll be recognising Memorial Day. We've got a service in the afternoon for council, so I'll be doing that in the afternoon. But yeah, look, I'm sure people will be out and enjoying it as they normally will.
How's South Canterbury rugby going this year, very briefly? My old stomping ground.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty positive we're still on top. We won last year and are looking really good again this year. So, yeah, looking good for the team.
Thanks, Nigel. Timaru District Mayor Nigel Bowen there. It is coming up 20-6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He iwi, homai o whakaro. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, time for the headlines with Sarah.
Kia ora, Nick. The clean-up is underway in London with the end of public events to mark the death of the Queen after her funeral last night in Westminster Abbey. Our reporter in London, Corin Dan, says crews worked very fast last night along the procession routes in central London. The Silver Ferns Test Series against Jamaica will go ahead after the tourists managed to ring in 3 former internationals. 7 Jamaican players arrived in New Zealand yesterday for the series, which starts tomorrow night in Auckland. Workers who deliver hundreds of tonnes of jib to building sites across Auckland each day are striking for better pay. About 40 truck drivers and labourers are picketing outside the Penrose base of delivery company CV Compton. The workers want an 11% pay rise. A coroner has today ruled Dunedin plumber Rory Nairn died from myocarditis caused by the COVID-19 vaccine in November last year. Professor LeGros, the director of the Malagan Institute, says the vaccine is safe and has saved lives here and abroad. A former Gloria Vale member says she was told to make sure the men had enough food even if the women didn't. In Christchurch today, Trudy Christian told the employment court women were told off if they ate while they worked in the religious community. And scientists have increased the alert level for the Lake Taupo volcanic from 0 to 1. GeoNet said it has detected almost 700 small earthquakes. The volcano's last eruption, about 200 BCE, was the largest on the planet in the past 5,000 years. Those are the headlines to traffic. State Highway 2 at Horokiwi in Wellington. The crash there has now been cleared, but there are still delays in the southbound lane, so be aware of that. I will have more news at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Sarah. Jib is gold right now, and so are the people delivering it to building sites across Auckland. That's the message from workers who have walked off the job. About 40 truck drivers and labourers are striking after pay negotiations with their employer, local delivery company CV Compton, stalled. The workers say the cost of living is driving them into hardship, while those further up the jib chain make big profits. Amy Williams went to the picket line.
Hundreds of tonnes of jib a day are delivered to building sites across Auckland by these workers. They want an 11% pay increase, but the offer on the table is far lower. Truck driver Hori Pōtaka says they deserve a fair deal.
Jib's not an easy job. Everybody's wanting it at the moment, and it's worth gold. And I think we're worth gold. That's because we deliver it. They can't get the jib without us.
Driver assistant James Ramia has worked for CV Compton for a decade. He says it feels like those delivering jib have fallen off the value chain.
Their mark is 300 tonne a day, and if we exceed that, then the company and both companies of Winston Wallboards and CV Compton, they get like a bonus, and none of it gets shared out to the workers.
Mr Ramia says it takes time to train workers to deliver the plasterboard, but they often last less than a week on the job because it's heavy labour.
It comes on pallets. The sizes ranging from 2.4 metres to 6 metres, and the health and safety regulation that we go from is 30 kgs for single man lift.
Fellow driver and union delegate Rick says each truck delivers 3 10-tonne loads a day.
We want to get paid what we're worth, yeah.
We're worth more than this, but this is what we want for now. Yes.
First Union organiser Emric Brown says CV Compton is paying its drivers below market rate at $26 an hour, when the benchmark is $30.
I'm hoping the company will come and meet us at 11%, just so that our members can live comfortably and get by week by week.
James Ramia says some members are facing financial hardship, but it's not something they like to admit. After rent and household expenses, he has just $100 in his pocket for food.
$100, that's got to go through food and your vehicle. You know, it's pretty hard. You got to depend on your other half or their family to support. And no grown man wants help from their family, you know what I mean? It's pretty embarrassing.
The strike will continue until the end of the week unless an agreement is reached. CV Compton has been approached for comment.
A coroner has ruled Dunedin plumber Rory Nairn died from myocarditis caused by the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. However, an immunologist says the tragedy shouldn't change how people view the vaccine. Timothy Brown reports.
Rory Nairn received his first dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine on November the 5th last year. In the days following, he reported to those around him that he was experiencing heart flutters, but put it down to stress. However, early on November the 17th, he collapsed in the bathroom of the home he shared with his fiancée, Ashley Wilson. He could not be revived. In findings released today, Coroner Sue Johnson ruled the vaccine caused the 26-year-old's death. She deferred to the expertise of pathologist Dr. Nolan Hung, who carried out the post-mortem. Coroner Johnson's words have been voiced.
I accept Dr. Hung's medical opinion that the direct cause of Rory's death was acute myocarditis, and that in the absence of any other cause for the myocarditis being identified by the numerous tests that Dr. Hung carried out or caused to be carried out, the myocarditis is consistent with vaccine-related myocarditis.
It is the second death a coroner has ruled was caused by the vaccine. Myocarditis is rare following vaccination, with international data showing 1 to 13 cases per 100,000 vaccine doses. It's caused by many things, including viral infection, and about 95 people with myocarditis are seen in hospitals in New Zealand each year. It's also treatable, with better outcomes if symptoms are picked up early and treatment begins. Immunologist Graham LeGros, director of the Mulligan Institute, says despite the tragic deaths, the vaccine remains safe.
I really feel sorry for all the family and friends and people involved in this awful event. But at the end of the day, does it change our view of the vaccine? No, the vaccine is really safe.
Professor LeGros says what the case highlights is the need to ensure those receiving medical treatment of any kind are provided the information they need.
There is a chance of risk with this vaccine, and you've got to be pre-warned, you've got to look and monitor, and the person receiving the vaccine, we need to make sure that they have the ability or are aware of and actually can access the treatments that will actually protect them from a bad reaction from the vaccine.
Professor LeGros says Aotearoa's relatively low death rate during the pandemic illustrates the importance of the country's widespread vaccine rollout. Coroner Johnson still has to determine the circumstances surrounding Mr. Nairn's death and whether she needs to make any recommendations or comments which could prevent similar deaths occurring in future. Mr. Nairn's partner, Ashley Wilson, did not wish to comment. The COVID-19 response minister, Aisha Verrill, also declined to comment while the coroner's inquiry is incomplete.
It's 13 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. To a bit of breaking news now. Police are responding to an incident at St Luke's Mall in Auckland after offenders entered a jewellery store, smashed some cabinets there and fled with some items. We'll bring you more on that in the news in just about 12 minutes' time. Long COVID's adding strain to support services for those suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome. For decades, those with the condition have been fighting for it to be recognised. They're now calling on the government to reclassify it as a disability, presenting a petition today to Parliament. Fiona Charlton was diagnosed with chronic fatigue in 2008 and is also the president of Complex Chronic Illness Support and the Associated New Zealand ME Society. She joins me now. Evening, Fiona.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. A momentous day for you. First, though, can we start on your own experience with chronic fatigue. How did it all start and what were some of the early signs?
Okay. When I was younger, I developed glandular fever, Epstein-Barr virus. And for a good 2 years after it, I would struggle with energy. I wouldn't be able to keep up with classmates in the playground and that sort of thing. And eventually, I started to improve, but I never got back to what I was like before it. And then moving on into my 20s, I ended up with food poisoning and then shingles, and then eventually it developed into ME. So yes, I have been chronically ill with ME since 2008 now.
And so you were diagnosed back in 2008, right? Is there still a stigma there, though, despite the fact that your diagnosis came, over 12 years ago?
Yes, there is, unfortunately, and even the lead medical associations still believe that it's a psychological rather than a biomedical disease, despite all the latest research that has been produced over the last decade to 20 years, showing the malfunctioning immune system, showing brain abnormalities, neuroendocrine disorders. It's all there in the research. It's all there in the symptoms that manifest as a result of the illness. But yeah, the stigma is still there, unfortunately, and that's something that I do as a volunteer for these non-profits, is to raise awareness and to re-educate medical professionals, general public, family whānau and carers of people with ME.
How does it make you feel when some parties, quite powerful parties, still suggest it is psychological?
It's frustrating, to say the least, and disappointing, particularly as the evidence is there. And we provide the research to them quite regularly. And, we have leading experts like Professor Warren Tate and Dr. Ros Ballings. Dr. Anna Brooks now has joined the party as a result of long COVID. And they're all showing the evidence through their research.
And so this reclassification to a disability, which you're petitioning for, how would that help people with the condition?
It would really legitimise the condition, validate it as a disabling condition. It also would enable us to have protection have our rights protected as disabled people. The thing that people don't realise is that it is disabling, and for a good 25% of all people with ME, they are actually bedbound and may actually require in-home nursing care. And for a good 60%, we're housebound. So we're unable to go and maintain employment and all the normal activities that our healthy counterparts can do. So what it would mean for us, reclassifying, would mean access to support services that we don't currently have access to. The criteria is very high, and it's currently either for people over 65 or for people who need 7 days a week care. But we have, a good 60% of our people who may only need 3 to 4 days of help, just helping with washing windows or making meals or, doing some of the housework. And that would really help improve the quality of life of people with ME because they only have a certain window of energy in a given day to do things. So if some of the, chores and things like that, day-to-day stuff could be taken care of, then they could focus on more meaningful things in their lives that they could do.
And we mentioned long COVID at the top right. How has that impacted, access and the capacity of support services?
Well, all of the non-profits around the country have taken on long COVID clients. So long COVID clients have looked around, and obviously there wasn't any support except for the ME charities. And so we've all taken on clients, provided them with information, examples of how to manage their symptoms and that kind of thing. But obviously, we're all stretched. Our resources are stretched, and all non-profits are underfunded. We are expecting at least 10% of all cases with long COVID to actually fit the criteria for a diagnosis of ME as well. So it means that prevalence is increasing. So we definitely, we need more funding, we need more resources, we need help from the government to provide those resources and services.
Thanks, Fiona. That is Fiona Charlton there. She is the president of Complex Chronic Illness Support. Right, a little bit more breaking news now. We're, of course, talking about the incident at St Luke's. Police say they are responding to an incident in Auckland at St Luke's Mall. They say a group of offenders have entered a jewellery store, smashed cabinets and taken some items. A vehicle believed to have been involved has been located a short distance away. We will have updates for you on that in the news. Life's returning to normal in London, but for many in the UK, the Queen's funeral has been the event that's made them fall in love with the royals again. After 10 days of mourning and extraordinary crowds in the city, the Elizabethan era is now over. But people on the street told our reporter Katie Todd and cameraman Nick Monroe the monarchy is as strong as ever.
They came in their millions, armed with camping chairs, blankets, Union Jack printed flags, some camping multiple nights in tents. People from all around the UK pouring into central London, Windsor and all the roads in between, putting their lives on hold to farewell Her Majesty the Queen. A sombre affair compared to the Jubilee and recent royal weddings. But for Cheryl Ora and Gemma Folks, who travelled to Windsor from Wales, it's been an important piece of history for them and their teenage daughters to be part of.
And these are both in high school and took options, and they've both took history. So it's quite good for them to go back to school and say, well, we were there and we've seen it.
And we love the royal family anyway.
Yeah.
While the funeral has been decades in planning, the scale of the commemorations has taken even locals by surprise. It drew an extra 1 million people to London, according to estimates by the city's Transport Authority, with as many as 4 billion viewers worldwide. This is a country gripped by a cost of living crisis and skyrocketing energy bills. But the death of the longest reigning monarch brought about a kind of suspended reality. Gavin Crittenden says the Queen's funeral drew people from all walks of life, including those like him who don't typically engage with the monarchy.
Yeah, it's something else completely. It's the crowd's just been enormous everywhere and all over the country really, Scotland and Wales, England, Ireland.
James Matthews from Devon agrees.
Yeah, it's really taken the nation, hasn't it, I think.
And perhaps location has played a role in that. Sue Luca is from Ascot, near Windsor, where she also watched the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2018. She says England is typically the hub of most royal occasions, but unlike the royal wedding, the Queen's death was a chance for the wider UK to participate.
She passed away in Scotland, and I think in a way that has brought the United Kingdom together. Because I think the Scottish people realise just how important it is to be part of the United Kingdom. So, and it was wonderful that the Scottish people could also pay their respects. You know, she was lying in rest in Scotland before she came to London.
Then there was the queue, the stoic line of humanity snaking along the River Thames, patiently waiting hours on end to pay their respects. The clearest sign of the immense respect the Queen garnered. So what does it all mean for the future of the royal family in the United Kingdom? Cheryl Ora believes the event has galvanised the UK, and the popularity of Queen Elizabeth may just carry over to King Charles and the rest of the royal family.
I think everyone's fell in love with them again.
Yeah, people appreciate them more than what they were last week and the week before, I think.
After a massive day in the UK, the Queen has been laid to rest, but it's clear her legacy will be long-lasting.
On a solemn day in the UK, there were still some light-hearted moments, even if they weren't planned that way. Australian TV Channel 9 was commentating the arrival of dignitaries to the Queen's funeral at Westminster Abbey. And when it came to the new British Prime Minister, they were stumped. Listen to this.
Who's this?
No, hard to identify. Maybe minor royals, members of the... I can't identify them at this point.
We can't spot everyone, unfortunately. They look like they could well be local dignitaries. It's hard to see. We're looking at the backs of their heads mostly.
But I think we are now getting to the pointy end, as they say, of the... I'm just told that was Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, in the distance that we could see hopping out of that car. Well, thank you very much.
It's only the British Prime Minister, Liz Truss. They were stumped all right, though. Right, a little bit of feedback before the news. Jeff says the Queen's Westminster Abbey service was boring. I didn't think it was boring. I thought it was quite entertaining, actually. Anyway, and it was a celebration. But Brian, he's got a different view. He says that he can't wait for the coronation. We had a little bit of feedback on the netball as well, saying that we were trying to get the good oil out of the coach. We were indeed. But that game, of course, will go ahead tomorrow. Time will tell, though, whether it's going to be a test or whether it's just going to be, well, I guess just a plain old game. I don't know what you call a plain game in netball. It's just a match, I suppose. Hopefully it's a test. Here's the news.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Sarah Bradley. Parliament is poised to legislate a public holiday to mark the Queen's death. The government announced the one-off public holiday before opting to pause lawmaking last week. The House has now resumed and is expected to enter urgency soon to pass the Queen Elizabeth II Memorial Day Bill. Leader of the House, Chris Hipkins, says the legislation setting up this coming Monday as an official public holiday should move through all stages tonight.
It'll require a bill through Parliament, to go through all stages of Parliament, either under urgency or by the agreement of the parties. So it will go through its first and second readings, committee stage and third readings all tonight.
There will be a national minute of silence on Monday, as well as an invite-only domestic state funeral. The clean-up is underway in London with the end of public events to mark the death of the Queen after her funeral last night in Westminster Abbey. Our reporter in London, Corinne Dan, says crews worked very fast last night along the procession routes in central London, and the UK's official mourning period ends in an hour.
Amazing how quickly they were pulling the bollards down and the barriers within minutes and hours. And last night I was up at the Abbey and it was almost back to normal. They moved very fast to get things flowing. So it really does feel like a pretty normal workday morning here early in London. The official mourning period ends 8 a.m. this morning London time. At that point the flags can go back up the mast.
However, members of the royal family will observe another 7 days of mourning. The Sunshine Girls are ringing in players to ensure the series against the Silver Ferns goes ahead. As a result of ongoing visa issues, 5 members of the Jamaican netball team have not been able to join their 7 other teammates in New Zealand. Jamaica coach Connie Francis told Checkpoint that former Jamaican shooter Carlo Borrega, who is based in New Zealand, is joining the team. Francis wasn't sure how much netball the 38-year-old had played recently.
I don't know what she's doing, if she's still playing netball down here, but when I heard that she'd be rejoining us, I was very happy because she's a very good player.
The first test is tomorrow night in Auckland. The Prime Minister has landed in New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Jacinda Ardern travelled from London on Canada's plane with its Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Ms Ardern has arrived in time for the opening of the UN's General Debate and will then co-host a Leaders' Summit for the Christchurch call, along with French President Emmanuel Macron. She'll also meet other world leaders on the event's sidelines. Police are responding to a robbery at the Stuart Dawson's jewellery store in the St Luke's shopping centre in Auckland. Police say a group of offenders smashed cabinets and took some items before fleeing the scene. A vehicle believed to have been involved in the robbery has been located a short distance away. The police say no shots have been fired and there is no threat to the public. Many jib deliveries will be on hold while workers who transport the building material go on strike this week. About 40 truck drivers and labourers are picketing outside the Penrose base of the delivery company they work for, CV Compton. They want an 11% pay rise, but the company has offered much less. First Union organiser Emmerich Brown says some workers are struggling to pay for food and petrol and need a fair deal.
I'm hoping the company will come and meet us at 11%, just so that our members can live comfortably and get by week.
The strike will continue until the end of the week unless an agreement is reached. CV Compton have been approached for comment. Immunologist Graham LeGros says the tragic death of a Dunedin man shouldn't change people's views on the safety of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. A coroner has today ruled Dunedin plumber Rory Nan died from myocarditis caused by the vaccine in November last year. Professor LeGros, the director of the Malligan Institute, says the 26-year-old's death highlights the need to ensure those receiving medical treatment are provided all the information they need.
There is a chance of risk with this vaccine, and you've got to be pre-warned, you've got to look and monitor, and the person receiving the vaccine, we need to make sure that they have the ability or are aware of and actually can access the treatments that will actually protect them from a bad reaction from the vaccine.
Professor LeGros says the vaccine is safe and has saved lives here and abroad. A former Gloria Vale member says she was told to make sure the men had enough food even if the women didn't. In Christchurch today, Trudy Christian told the employment court women were told off if they ate while they worked in the Christian community. Ms Christian says women would be sometimes so busy preparing, serving and cleaning dishes for a meal they wouldn't have time to eat themselves.
There was also a tradition or culture taught to us by Priya Darling, the head kitchen lady, that if we ran out of food, we should always make sure the men had enough. And so we, the women and girls, sometimes missed out on dinner.
Trudy Christian says the working women were told many times that if they didn't work, they wouldn't eat. A man hospitalised following a Manu house fire has been charged with assault in a bedside court hearing. One person died in the fire in the Auckland suburb on Saturday. The injured man is in Middlemore Hospital and has been charged with assaulting a female and contravening a protection order. Police are continuing to treat the death as unexplained and say they're still investigating. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples the latest from indie folk star Julia Jacqueline, along with new jazz from Pueneke's Clear Path Ensemble. Environmentalist Keith Morfitt argues mining isn't the only way to make a buck on the West Coast, while our thinker Anne Kerwin wants to turn the tables and ask me about my philosophy. That's right, living a good life from Socrates to Crump. On Nights, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air, Te Reo Irirangi o Aotearoa. We're back with Nick Truebridge and Checkpoint next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo and Timaru Nui, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne. Occasional rain or showers, possibly heavy, clearing tomorrow evening, apart from the odd shower about Northland and Auckland. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Partly cloudy with isolated showers today, rain for a time early tomorrow, then showers, some may be thundery. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, scattered showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms about Bulla this afternoon. For Canterbury, partly cloudy, isolated showers clearing this evening, then showers spreading north again tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain and possible thunderstorms in Westland, clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. For Otago and Southland, scattered showers with thunderstorms possible today, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain developing this afternoon. This is RNZ National. It's 7.5 minutes past 6. I'll have the headlines at 6:30.
Thanks, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. A Maryland judge has thrown out the murder conviction of a man accused of murdering his former girlfriend 23 years ago. Adnan Syed walked free today after more than 2 decades in prison after prosecutors said 2 other suspects were not disclosed at his original trial. The now 43-year-old was jailed for killing his 18-year-old former girlfriend, Heyman Lee, and burying her in a Baltimore park in 1999. As the ABC's Mary Lloyd reports, Syed has always maintained his innocence.
Walking free for the first time since he was 18 years old, Adnan Syed was swamped by supporters and the media outside the Maryland court that released him. Last week, prosecutors filed a motion to have his murder conviction overturned, saying a review they undertook into the case revealed grave problems. The state's attorney for Baltimore is Marilyn Mosby.
Through our review, our reinvestigation revealed that the original prosecutors and the subsequent prosecutors in the Attorney General's office failed to disclose relevant information about alternative suspects, one of whom threatened to kill the victim and had motive to kill the victim, and both of whom had a pattern of violence against women. Our investigation suggests that the two suspects may have been involved individually or may have been involved together in the death of that beautiful young woman. We also received information that provided motive for that same alternative suspects.
She says that information was not disclosed to the defendant, which violates a rule in US courts.
We're not yet declaring Adnan Syed is innocent, but we are declaring that in the interest of fairness and justice, he is entitled to a new trial.
Adnan Syed has always said he did not kill 18-year-old Heyman Lee, who was strangled and buried in Baltimore Park.
This is a Global CalLink prepaid call from
Adnan Syed.
His version of events captured the attention of hundreds of millions of people who downloaded the Serial podcast hosted by Sarah Koenig. The production detailed her exploration of the evidence, released weekly in hour-long episodes from October 2014 onwards.
No one can ever come with any type of proof or anecdote or anything to ever say that I was ever mad at her, that I was ever angry with her. At the end of the day, man, the only thing I can ever say is I had no reason to kill her.
Serial was revolutionary at the time, launching the true crime podcast genre into the mainstream. Lily Paquet, lecturer in writing at the University of New England, says the way it pulled together voices of the people involved gave it a strong emotional impact.
Serial was probably the first important true crime podcast that's influenced everything that's come since.
Included among those is a now famous Australian production by Hedley Thomas, National Chief Correspondent at The Australian.
It was something that was in my mind when I was producing and getting ready to release The Teacher's Pet a few years later. It was a very powerful and important production that showed just how far we could go with this sort of storytelling in a long-form style.
Hurricane Fiona has struck Puerto Rico, leaving millions without power. It's caused catastrophic flooding and triggered around 1,000 rescues. Hurricane Fiona strikes almost 5 years to the day after Hurricane Maria devastated the US island territory. CNN's Leila Santiago has more.
Almost the entire island of Puerto Rico remains in the dark after Hurricane Fiona slammed into the southwestern coast of the island Sunday afternoon. Pounding rainfall causing catastrophic mudslides and flooding. The storm coming just as parts of the island were finally recovering from Hurricane Maria's destruction 5 years ago.
It's been rough. We've been just working to get back this neighborhood, get it back from Maria, that everything was destroyed. Restaurants, houses, everything was destroyed. And we just not all the way back, but we just halfway back. A lot of people, more than Maria, lost their houses now, lost everything on their houses because of the flooding.
This is the barrio, the neighborhood where the National Guard had to come and rescue people. Still a lot of flooding. I could hear generators powering the home, and it is still pouring down with rain. Neighbors looking out, wondering exactly what will come next as Hurricane Fiona, the remnants of it, continue to demolish this area.
The family rescued overnight, now safely in a shelter.
Esto fue peor que María.
She says this was worse than Maria.
El efecto de la lluvia.
She's pointing out that they've already been underwater for 24 hours and the rain is still coming down. So she's concerned about the 2,500 families that she says are impacted by this here.
About 1,000 people rescued from floodwaters. Hundreds more rescue efforts still underway as emergency responders try to navigate through difficult-to-reach areas. In Utuado, the interior part of the island, 25-year-old Leomar Rodriguez watched this bridge come apart in just minutes and wash down the river. On the west side of the island, rainfall swelling the Guanajibo River in Orvigueros, surpassing its previous record height at 28.59 feet, set during Hurricane Maria, now gauging to over 29 feet, the National Weather Service said. While a few hospitals have regained power, emergency workers are racing to get electricity back to the island.
It takes them so long to get things back up because so many of the systems are connected. And some of the main lines go through the hills there. And if those main lines get damaged, they don't have the ability to get the other sections up and running.
Sunday morning, President Joe Biden approving an emergency declaration for Puerto Rico that authorizes all emergency measures needed, including FEMA.
There's 300 responders on the ground from FEMA working hand in glove with the Commonwealth and their emergency management structure.
Queen Elizabeth has made her final journey from London to Windsor and has been buried alongside her late husband, Prince Philip. With a state funeral and military procession, people from around the world watched as Britain paid a final farewell to its longest-serving monarch. The funeral at Westminster Abbey brought together King Charles III, the royal family, and 500 presidents, prime ministers and foreign dignitaries. Prayers paid tribute to the Queen's long-life sense of duty and dedication to her people. The BBC's Johnny Diamond reports.
A cold, grey morning in ceremonial London as the Queen's coffin left Westminster Hall for the Abbey. Lifted onto the state gun carriage, followed by the King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, her 4 children, with 3 grandchildren behind. The short journey was accompanied by pipers and drums, a day long planned for, but perhaps never really imagined had come. The gun carriage was drawn by naval ratings, a tradition stretching back to Queen Victoria. Into the Abbey where she was married, where she was crowned so many decades ago, her coffin was lifted. On their feet awaiting her, a mass of mourning black. Presidents and prime ministers, sheikhs and emirs, kings and queens, along with the great and the good of the British establishment. The coffin, draped in the vivid yellow, blue and red of the royal standard, was placed on a catafalque. The prime minister read a lesson.
Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself.
That hymn, Psalm 23, was sung at her wedding to Prince Philip, a union that supported her decade after decade and that she wanted marked. The Archbishop of Canterbury gave the sermon. He remembered the Queen's pledge at 21 years old that she would dedicate her life to service. Rarely, he said, had such a promise been so well kept.
People of loving service are rare in any walk of life. Leaders of loving service are still rarer. But in all cases, those who serve will be loved and remembered when those who cling to power and privileges are long forgotten.
There were prayers from the leaders of different Christian denominations in Britain, a favourite hymn, and music played first at her coronation, then a commendation by the Archbishop. Then the trumpet sounded, and silence fell upon the Abbey. For 2 minutes, nothing. With the national anthem, the service closed. The coffin was lifted again, out of the Abbey, onto the gun carriage, and into the streets of ceremonial London. All night, many had waited for this moment, camping out in the chill, reserving spots to see the procession. It did not disappoint. A Again the gun carriage. Behind walked the king, the princes, the princess. But this time they went past Buckingham Palace and on towards Wellington Arch on the corner of Hyde Park, where the state hearse waited. It would drive through streets packed with onlookers, some throwing flowers, some applauding, many just wanting to see the moment when the Queen left her capital for the last time. In Windsor, where she'd spent the Second World War going from girl to young woman, and where she and her prince had spent much of the pandemic, her travels finally ended. Huge crowds packed the long walk to the castle. St George's Chapel, her final resting place, awaited. Up on the steps of the west porch the coffin was lifted, resting on it a wreath of rosemary, English oak and myrtle, the myrtle cut from a plant grown from the Queen's wedding bouquet all those years ago, and flowers in shades of gold, pink and deep burgundy. The Dean of Windsor gave the reading.
And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end.
Then came high ceremony. In complete silence, the removal of the instruments of state from the coffin, the sceptre, the orb and the imperial state crown, each handed to the Dean of Windsor, each carried to the high altar, each laid on a dark purple cushion. Then King Charles stepped forward. He laid the Queen's Company camp colour on the head of the coffin. The Lord Chamberlain broke his wand of office and laid that on the coffin. The Dean of Windsor read Psalm 103 as the coffin of the Queen was slowly lowered into the royal vault. The styles and titles of the Queen were read. Her piper played a lament. And after a blessing from the Archbishop of Canterbury, the national anthem.
It's 20 minutes past 6, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Large protests have erupted across Iran following the death of a young woman who'd been detained for violating the country's conservative dress code. Demonstrators want the notorious morality police dismantled, and experts say the country could be on the brink of a more intense uprising as anti-regime sentiment grows, the ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
For a third day, demonstrators have taken to the streets across Iran, with women removing their headscarves and shouting death to the dictator. It follows the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, an ethnic Kurd who died after her arrest in Tehran last week by the country's morality police. The morality police have enforced strict rules requiring women to cover their hair and wear loose-fitting clothes in public since Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution. Now demonstrators are calling for the agency to be dismantled.
My voice trembled when I heard this news because this has happened to me once or twice. I was thinking that if this happened to me, how would my parents feel?
Kurdish rights groups say 2 men have been killed in the protests. Tehran's police chief says Mahsa Amini's death was an unfortunate incident he doesn't want repeated, while denying accusations that officers beat her. Kylie Moore-Gilbert is an expert on the Middle East and Islamic studies based in Melbourne, who spent more than 800 days in prison in Iran before being freed in late 2020.
I was there in 2019 when the last mass protest movement erupted, and we were flooded with protesters from the day 2 or day 3 of the uprising. The prison was so packed that the prisoners were actually sleeping in the corridors between cells because they didn't have enough cells to put everyone in. There was that many of them arrested. So Iran is roiled by periods of protests every couple of years or so, really, because the people are just so fed up with this morally and financially corrupt regime. There's a huge amount of anger and it's roiling the country right now. I think it's sort of tapped into an undercurrent of rage at, not only the morality police and the regime's imposition of forced hijab on 50% of the population, but also its corruption, its mismanagement, and just a general disaffection with this Islamic Republic regime and a desire for change.
Barbara Slavin is the director of the Atlantic Council's Future of Iran initiative, based in Washington, D.C.
The regime has to cut people some slack at some point. If the economy is poor, if they're not going to come back into compliance with the nuclear deal, if Iran is still going to be treated like a pariah state by many, they have to at least ease up on personal life. You know, I think they often talk about the Chinese model in Iran. Well, the Chinese model is that you get to have some sort of personal freedom, even if you have no political freedom. In Iran, now you have no personal freedom and no political freedom, and I think it's just untenable.
Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council's Future of Iran initiative, finishing that report from Gavin Coote. The Ukrainian city of Izyum was liberated more than a week ago, but Ukrainian authorities face huge obstacles as they try to restore the partially ruined city to livability. Volunteers have brought food and medicine, but fighting still rages nearby. CNN's Ben Wiedemann has more.
Help arrives in Izyum, bags of barley meal, tins of food. Waiting her turn, Inessa shrugs off the tribulations of late. She's seen worse. We survived World War II when I was little, she tells me. Surgeon Oksana Karpetyan hands out medicine. Sedatives are in high demand.
They've got half of a year, 6 months, without any help. You can understand what do they just imagine what do they feel.
Liberation from Russia isn't the end of Izyum's troubles. Much of the city was severely bombarded before falling in spring to the Russians. There's no running water, no electricity, no heat. Crowds gather to charge cell phones off an army generator and make calls, 10 minutes per person, using internet provided by a satellite connection. Lubov and her daughter Angela are calling relatives. They want to leave. Winter is coming. People will freeze, Angela warns. Older people won't survive. They also fear the Russians could return. Nearby, the signs of their hasty retreat. Helmets strewn outside a house Russian soldiers commandeered. Breadcrumbs still on the table. Insects make a meal of fruit half-eaten. On the edge of town, the remains of Russia's once vaunted army before a monument harking back to a different time, which now seems like the distant past. Natasha shows me a newspaper distributed during the occupation. What does she think of him? I haven't thought anything good about him since 2000, she says. He destroyed everything in Russia. The paper does, however, come in handy.
The United States has agreed to a prisoner swap with the Taliban. It's exchanging a Navy veteran for a convicted drug trafficker from Afghanistan. President Joe Biden says it was a difficult decision, but one that reflects a commitment to bringing wrongfully detained Americans home. Here's the ABC's Jade McMillan.
At Kabul's international airport, Bashir Noorzai is embraced by Taliban fighters before addressing a room full of officials.
My exchange, I think, God willing, can lead to peace between Afghanistan and America. An American was released and I am also free, with the help of the Taliban government, the Islamic Emirate and the Mujahideen Holy Fighters.
Bashir Noorzai spent 17 years in US custody after being sentenced to life in prison on drug trafficking charges. US prosecutors had alleged he owned opium fields in Afghanistan's southern province of Kandahar, used to produce opium, which was then imported into the United States. At the time of his sentencing, they described him as being an influential tribal leader and a strong ally of the Taliban. Jonathan Schroden is the director of the Countering Threats and Challenges program at the Virginia-based think tank, the CNA Corporation.
He was one of the earliest supporters of the Taliban movement and someone that the Taliban, again, have been trying to secure his release from U.S. custody for many, many years.
After months of negotiations, Noorzai has been granted clemency by US President Joe Biden in exchange for the release of US Navy veteran Mark Frericks, who was kidnapped 2.5 years ago while working on civilian engineering projects in Afghanistan. The Taliban's acting foreign minister says the swap will open further communication with the United States. But Laura Neek, a professor of political science at Miami University, doesn't believe Washington is any closer to formally recognising the Taliban following its return to power last year.
I think that the Taliban has a long way to go before it will be able to fully engage the U.S. government. And I don't know if the United States government will ever move to recognise the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan.
Mark Frericks has been flown to Doha ahead of his return home. His health is said to be stable. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has welcomed his release and used it to send a broader message.
I want the families of Americans who are being arbitrarily detained or held hostage anywhere in the world to know that our commitment to them, to bringing their loved ones home, is resolute.
The US is trying to negotiate the release of 2 high-profile Americans being detained in Russia, basketballer Brittany Griner and former Marine Paul Whelan. To the great frustration of their families, it hasn't yet been able to strike agreement on a proposed prisoner swap for their return.
That's it from us tonight. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the evening. And if you missed anything from the show, you can always check it out on Checkpoint, which is on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow from 5, First Up, of course, is back with Nathan. He'll be asking Nationals Deputy Nicola Willis about the Uffindale saga and whether it's time for New Zealand to become a republic. A little bit of feedback from Pat just before we go. She says, "Dear Checkpoint, thank you very much for the interesting reporting done by the hard-working Kiwi news team in post-Elizabethan Britain." Hey, our pleasure, Pat, and thank you so much for listening. Nathan's here tomorrow from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Police are responding to an incident at St Luke's Mall after offenders entered a jewellery store, smashed the cabinets and fled with some items. The clean-up is underway in London after the Queen's funeral last night in Westminster Abbey. Hurricane Fiona has strengthened as it moves across the Dominican Republic, bringing torrential rain and powerful winds of 170 kilometres an hour. And the Prime Minister has arrived in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pacific Waves, delving deeper into the major Pacific stories of the week in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the region and the world. I bring you interviews with Pacific newsmakers, experts and commentators in their fields, as well as up-to-date coverage from our talented team here at RNZ Pacific and our correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves, 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
Nau mai anō, haere atu anō, aku mihi whakawhetai, aku whakamānua kia koutou katoa. Kua tahuri mai ki te pai o Party People. Ko mihi ngā rangi a hau e kawi ana I te Māori o tō tātou wānanga I te pōnei. Welcome to Party People, brought to you by the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Today I'm joined by 2 of the late Queen Elizabeth's favourite treaty partners, the Earl of Awanui, Shane Jones, and the Lord of Kawero, Shane Te Pau, tēnā kōrua.
Kia ora. We didn't sign. We didn't sign. We did not sign, but we settled.
Yeah, you probably can't be a lord if you didn't sign.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of passing leaders, ko hinga tētehi tōtara o te ao Māori, tērā wiki ara ko Manu Paul. A Māori rights advocate, he was involved in significant waitangi claims, including flora and fauna, fisheries, and also instrumental in bringing the rangatahi court to his marae. Do you have a kōrero about Manu?
Manu had an unusual English name, Cletus. And when we wanted to be cheeky to him, we used to call him Cletus in the north. Look, Manu was a significant figure in areas that have now been forgotten, such as the kiwi fruit claim. You may recall in the early 90s, a group of kiwi fruit growers and Manu Paul got together to challenge the monopoly of the old kiwi fruit board, and they feared that unless Māori had the opportunity to not only grow freely kiwi fruit out of the strictures of the Kiwifruit board, they would be forced through a very narrow funnel. He was unsuccessful, and more recently, I don't know if you know this, Shane, but he wrote a book about soil sovereignty. So as he got older, he seemed to get very focused on regenerative agriculture and horticulture. So a man who was a school teacher, and I think if I'm not mistaken, he was also a cop. I've known him since the 1980s, and we should definitely acknowledge his passing. He was a tōtara tree.
I was lucky enough, he was a teacher of mine in Kawerau College, and I think he might have taught, officially might have been maths, but it was politics. And what we didn't really understand is, because we were quite young, how much of a powerful force he was outside his teacher's profession. This is a guy that was a Fulbright scholar. And was very scholarly, basically from the first time I knew him, and his legacy grows on in many ways. But he's a guy. Him and his wife have produced 2 district court judges. It's quite unusual, siblings, and that will carry on. But what I liked about Manu is that not only would he address issues that were of concern to Māori, if he thought something within Māoridom was wrong, he would have them on. And one of his last battles,